Welcome to the Purdue Extension Succession Planning Team webinar series. This webinar is going to be talking about defining your dream, personal and professional goal setting. My name is Renee Wyatt. I'm the Family Business Management Specialist in the Department of Ag Econ.
And I'm Maria Marshall, professor in the Department of Agricultural Economics and the director of the Purdue Institute for Family Business.
The material that you're about to see is actually based on a grant that the succession planning team received through the North Central Extension Risk Management Education Center. A little bit about the Purdue Farm Succession Planning Team. We're committed to cultivating strong families and farm families through the succession planning process by providing them educational opportunities and current resources. And you can see the current map of where our team is located around the state of Indiana.
So today's presentation is all about goals. And like Yogi Berra said, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. I also like to think of goals of where you want to go on vacation and where you're planning to go. If nobody knows and you haven't said it, you're probably might end up in every exit that you find, or you may not get where you thought you were going to go. Maybe California sounded good and you end up in Utah. You don't want to do that. So that's what goals help you define, is where you want to go and how you want to get there. So we're going to talk about goals and objectives. Goals can be broad or general. A lot of times we call them BHAGs, big hairy goals, because they can be broad. They can really stretch you to what you want to do. They don't have to be 1-year goals. They could be 5, 10-year goals. And particularly in family businesses, you may have some short-term goals that are 1, 2, 3 years, and you may have a 20-year goal, that is, you want to pass on your family business to your own family or an outside successor or managers. So when you think about goals, don't think that they have to be short term. They can also be very broad because they will help guide your strategy. And objectives should be very clear and concise. They should be, we'll talk about SMART objectives, but it is about how you're going to get you, yourself, your family business to be able to accomplish those goals. So yes, goals and objectives are important. So like we said before, goals help you and help shape where you're going. A lot of times they help shape you as well. And objectives help you get there. And we want to talk about personal and professional goals. Whether you are in a family business or considering having a family business, have a family farm, you want to make sure that you're taking personal goals into consideration, not just the professional goals or the family business goals. Mm-hmm. You have to think about how all of those fit in together to help you progress. You want to make sure that it's really integrated. And so when you're thinking about goals and objectives and working towards something, make sure that you do have timelines and metrics. You also don't want to go so crazy that if you meet a deadline or you don't meet a metric, that you set metrics that are unreasonable, timelines that are unreasonable. So you want to make sure you do set something, and you might miss them, but at least you're working toward that. And you're going to set goals and objectives related to management and ownership succession. And those may not go the same path, and they may not go in the same way. So as you're thinking about those, you might set management goals that are more short-term and ownership goals that are more long-term. We did a survey of family farms, basically in the Midwest, and we asked them a whole bunch of questions about succession. And so we asked them, what's your primary business goal for the family business? And you see that 22% said profit. Usually we always say that farmers or family business or businesses are profit maximizing. Well, this shows us that not all of them are. Mm-hmm. They actually have different goals. And sometimes, you might have a positive reputation with customers as your primary goal, and profit is your second goal. Right? And so a positive reputation leads you to have higher profits, but it not might be the primary goal of the business. 16% said business survival, 10% said keeping the business in the family, and 11% said an opportunity to work with family members. And a lot of times we would consider a positive reputation with customers, keeping the business in the family, and an opportunity to work with family members as social emotional wealth, non-financial goals that can be just as important as those financial goals. So discussing goals takes time. It's not going to you're not going to reach consensus on your goals over 1 hour, one time, one week. It's going to take a lot of time. And you're going to have family members with a lot of different perspectives. Think about in a family business, you have 2 generations, maybe 3 a lot of times in a family farm. You're going to have the granddad, grandma hat, the owner, manager hat, the son hat, the grandson, granddaughter hat, and all of those things in between where you're an employee or a manager or not an owner. And so people are going to have different perspectives and different ways that they're going to think about the family business and the way that they want to set goals for the shorter term and the longer term. We know that incumbents, grandma, grandpa, mother, father, and not the kids, are going to be the incumbents. And they might have a more past-looking perspective to setting goals. So this is what's worked for us in the past, so let's stick with what's worked for us. And you might have what we would call the successor generation, the younger generation coming into the business now, who has a more forward-looking way of thinking about the business and thinking about things that could change. Maybe they want to diversify, try different things. So there are going to be different perspectives, and you just need to think about what can you bring consensus around. Do you all agree that you want to keep the business in the family? That's actually maybe the first and most important goal. Is that something that you want to do, and what falls from that? So of course then setting goals for succession is going to be very important, and it might be a fact-finding mission when you're thinking about, okay, we want to have this to be a family business. Now, what are our goals for management and ownership succession? How long will this take? What are the values that we're going to bring around having a cohesive family and a cohesive business, and how can we make that work together? So again, another question from our survey, which is we asked how often are goals discussed. And we see that some people say all the time. A lot of times I would consider that family business we get together, we have breakfast, we discuss the goals of what we're going to do day to day in the kitchen and go on to work. And so goals are discussed all the time. And then we have the nevers on the other extreme, which I would say avoid each other in the kitchen and go on to do what, they've basically specialized their tasks, may not be getting along that well, and when they have to on tax time may come together to decide what they're going to do for the next year. So we want to maybe be somewhere in between those, maybe all the time, maybe too much, but definitely on a monthly, quarterly, or yearly basis is a good way to think about goals, particularly if they're longer term goals. So another question that you might find interesting is we ask the frequency of goal discussion by successor and not having a successor. So you can see the oranges, if you have identified a successor, they tend to discuss goals more often, right? So all the time, 42%. If you don't have a successor, 31% of the time. Now, I don't think just because somebody didn't identify a successor that they couldn't have a successor. They might have multiple successors, and so they haven't maybe picked one or identified one, or as I would call, they've implicitly talked about maybe possibly coming into the farm. That's what I see a lot with my family business management students that are going back to the farm. There's been a lot of discussion in some sense, but no specifics, giving a lot of times when you haven't identified a successor. And then of course we have the on the other extreme, those that have identified a successor and never discuss any goals. So you wonder how that is going to move forward. But we did ask some questions in our survey about, how often did the incumbent generation discuss succession management plans, and we did have some people that said we did not. We just said this is what's going to happen. So maybe that's where the nevers come from. And then of course, as you would expect, 18% of those that haven't identified a successor never discuss goals. So as you're thinking about family business goals, and I alluded to this earlier, there's 2 types of goals. You've got financial goals, which are profit, growth, revenue, and then these non-financial goals, transgenerational control, basically passing it on to the family, status and reputation, that, wanting a good reputation with customers, good reputation with the community, with your suppliers, with your elevator, all of those things would fall into there. Benevolent social ties, which just means the social networks that you have, and the emotion and affect you might get from having those good community ties. And then emotional commitment, which a lot of times is called high identity between the family and the family business. We know that family farms in particular, families that own farms in particular, have a high emotional commitment. So to give you an example, research shows that somebody who owns a family business and wants to pass it on to a family business says that their business is worth 30% more than it is, and it's called emotional value, right? So you add an emotional value to having that family business. And so a lot of times in a family farm, if you ask them, what's the price for selling that family farm, they'll say they won't sell it at any price. That's that emotional commitment, that going above and beyond that you find. And so research shows, and a lot of theory shows, that what differentiates a family business from a non-family business is these non-financial goals, this social emotional wealth preservation, basically, is what you call it, where that becomes the primary thing. Finances, profit, growth, revenue are an input for the output of being able to take that family on to the next generation. So as you're thinking about it, you need to be effective. We talked about goals, a lot about goals long term. You want to make sure that you set objectives, right, that are SMART, measurable. So you have to set symmetric, action oriented. A lot of times I say, make sure you know who is going to do it. If we all say we're all going to wash the dishes, nobody does, right? And so we have to think about being action oriented. Who's going to do it? Basically, realistic and timely. Set a timeline for those objectives. Remember, those objectives are what's going to get you to those goals.
So when we're thinking about SMART goals, it is hard a lot of times to come up with goals that are actually SMART, but I've got some examples to kind of help you. So we've got a personal example. A personal non-SMART goal would just say, I want to lose weight. That's not really measurable. You don't really know how you're going to do it and what timeline. So sure, you could lose weight, but you're not going to feel like you actually met that, right? So the way to have it be a SMART goal would be to say, or a SMART objective, I want to lose 20 pounds by the end of the year by eating 5 salads a week and working out 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week. That way you have some objectives, you know how to get there, and they're measurable, and you know who's going to do them and how you're going to, and at the end of the year, you'll see if you met your objective or not. On the professional side, people might say, I want to grow our business. And that would be an example of a non-SMART objective, because everybody wants to grow their business, you would think, in some way. A way to make that a SMART objective would be to say, I will grow our business by acquiring 3 new clients in the next 2 months, by maintaining our current clients, asking clients for referrals, increasing our social media presence by our business. That could help us grow our business. So now that we've gone through the goals and objectives, we're going to take a couple of minutes and do an activity. So we want you to write down a series of personal and business goals that you want to accomplish in the next 5 years. And if you could do 3 business goals and 3 personal goals, and then write down objectives for 1 of those personal goals and 1 of those business goals for the next year. And remember to make sure that your objectives are SMART. Great. So now that you've written down your goals and objectives, we're going to move on to action plans.
So action plans, my favorite. I used to have a cartoon that had an elephant and a spider, and an elephant, oh no, it was a little kid coming down the slide, and there was a spider at the end with a spider web, and it said, I'm going to eat really well tonight. So think about, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Those are your action plans, really. It's really chopping down your objectives into really things that you can do and that are manageable projects. So if we take the example that Renee gave us on the business side about increase our social media presence, well, that in itself would be an action plan, because you would want to decide, okay, what do we need to do to increase our social media presence? How can we divide all of those different things into different action plans? So it's a really good example in terms of being able to chop it up. So it's small, manageable projects. You definitely want to put them on some kind of calendar on what you're going to do. So for example, you quickly realize how little time you have when you actually put things on a calendar. And remember that when you're doing action plans and these objectives, you also have action plans for your business and personal goals and objectives. And that when you put things on a calendar, think about those things as well. When are you going to do what? You're running a family business. You're really busy. If you don't put it on your calendar, if you're like me, it does not exist. So you want to make sure you do that. And if you know, hey, spring break is coming on, we're going to take the kids somewhere, the grandkids are coming, don't put a whole bunch of work objectives on that week. Realize that, if you were going to do some research on maybe Facebook targeting or Twitter or thinking about new seed supplies or things like that, don't put it on the week when your grandkids are coming from spring break, right? That's the really good thing about putting things on a calendar, where you can realize, okay, this is what we're going to do and this is how long it's going to take. And you soon realize, as I do, that summer is really short and we try to do a lot of stuff in the summer. And if you're a farmer, you thinking you're going to take more time off and do a whole bunch of education in the winter, like now, and then you realize winter is really short. And so it really helps you do that.
Perfect. So now that we've learned about action plans, we're going to have an activity. So if you could take your sheet and write down a series of action plans for 2 of your personal objectives and for 2 of your business objectives. Evaluate each action plan after you've written down. Make sure that it's not too daunting and it doesn't take too much time. We like to say make sure that each action plan doesn't take more than about a week or so to complete. So we're going to give you a couple of minutes here to do that. Okay, great. So we hope that you have some great action plans written down. Next, we're going to move on to tracking your progress.
So I also hope that you have some great action plans written down, and that you really think about this calendar option. It can really blow your mind when you realize how little time you really have in the day to do the things you think you're going to do that are extra from the day-to-day things. Because really a lot of times these things, succession planning, thinking about ownership and management and how you're bringing in the next generation and all these things are on top of everything that you are doing every day to make your business run. So make sure you really are thinking about the time that it's going to take you. So, you really need to track your progress and make sure that you're on track to do what you thought you were going to do. And it may be that you were very ambitious and you set 5 goals and 30 objectives and 50 action plans, and you're only getting to 10. That's still making progress, right? We want to make sure that we are realistic and we're not stressing ourselves out trying to get to do this. And it'll help you maintain your momentum to really be thinking about what you're doing. And it's like the losing weight example. If you weigh yourself every day and you lose 30 pounds, if you're like me, you're like, woohoo, not 30 pounds. I mean, half a pound. I really would be woohoo if I lost 30. But half a pound, you're like, oh, I'm making progress toward my goal, right? It's the same thing. So it really helps you maintain that momentum. So make sure you are using a calendar or some way to track it. Another thing that I do is I write down the things that are my action plans that I need to do, and then I scratch it off as I'm going along, run a line through it to know that I'm making progress. And I have to admit that when I do something and it wasn't on my list and I knew I had to do it, I write it down and then scratch it off. So it's because it makes me feel good and it makes you feel like you are working towards something. So again, setting deadlines, short-term and long-term, are really important. Determining the deadlines for each task that are realistic. Remember to be realistic. This is on top of everything you're doing in the long and short term. And place it in order of the deadlines, so to make sure that you really are staying on track.
So what if I miss my deadline, Maria? What do I do then?
Well, don't stress out. It's probably going to happen. More often than not, you are going to miss some of the deadlines, right? Some things are out of your control. You're going to have some unforeseen situations. And sometimes, it's just going to happen. You just couldn't get to it. So just reevaluate where you are, reset the deadline, and then don't estimate that you're going to be... Don't estimate and don't try to do too much, because you're actually going to make yourself feel bad. So I'll tell you my example of this. I was talking about the summer is very short, and I had set myself up a series of things that I was going to do over the summer, and I kept seeing it on my calendar, this thing that I really pretty had been unrealistic, thinking that I was going to be able to do this. And in the end, I had to just delete it from my calendar because it was stressing me out. But you have to realize that sometimes we are overambitious, especially the first time we're really trying to set things down, because we want to get a lot of things done, and we just set the deadline to be just unrealistic deadlines. But you do want to make sure, though, that you are getting to what you need to get to. So a lot of times what we see is family businesses come in, they say they want to do succession planning, and they come in again and they're exactly the same place. Right? So they're not doing the homework to be able to move forward. So you want to make sure that you are keeping the momentum and succession planning to move forward. Not just for the incumbent's sake and trying to say, okay, well, I'm thinking about retiring and these are the things you want to do. Think of the frustration from the next generation who wants things to move forward, but things keep stuck in the same loop, and nothing happens. Think of their frustration as nothing moves, as a way to make things move forward. And when it comes to succession planning and ownership planning, you have to think that the incumbent's the one that's really driving that car at that moment, or truck at that moment, and so the next generation can push, but they have a hard time pushing maybe as much as they should.
So we've learned a lot about goals and objectives. So we know where we want to go, we know the steps to take, but how can we enhance and expand our own skills? So that's where professional development comes in. You may be saying to yourself, I'm from a small family business, I'm on a family farm, I don't need professional development, but that is not true at all. So professional development can enhance your skills, it can expand your skill set, and professional development can be a way to help you reach your goals. You can get new certifications or trainings, you can attend some conferences on new topics, or get updates on different weeds and different tools that you can use on your farm. Check out meetings in your area, whether it's through extension, whether it's a succession meeting in your area that you can attend. Maybe there is like an FSA meeting or something, and pay attention to what your farm or family business needs specifically, because there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all when it comes to professional development. And make sure you don't neglect your leadership development, because that's a huge part of professional development. So a professional development plan, I'm going to call it a PDP. It outlines your career goals and it sets a guide for meeting those goals. One important thing when you're developing your PDP is to be self-aware and ask for input from coworkers, employees, your manager, maybe someone on your board. Just make sure you're very, very realistic with yourself so that you can really get to where you want to go and make sure that your professional development really enhances and expands your skill set. So we're going to go through the 10 steps to developing your PDP.
And Renee, before you do that, you want to make sure that when you are self-aware and you're asking for input, you have to be open to really hear that input.
And criticism, yes.
Criticism. So if you're asking, what are the things that I need to work on? Nobody is going to tell you where you're wonderful at communication if that's what you need to work on. So
Right.
think about, you are asking to, in a sense, be, criticized, not in a rude way, but that is what professional development does, is help us shore up the areas that we need to work on.
Yeah, and it will push you outside of your comfort zones in a lot of cases.
Yes.
Yeah. So the first step when we do a PDP is to assess where are you now. So look at your current career situation, look at your position and your responsibilities, just the things that you're doing right now in the position where you are. Step 2 is where do you want to go? Think about your short-term and long-term ambitions and don't hold back. Dream big when it comes to this. Where do you want to go? You can say, in a year, I maybe want to be, I want to take over the seed part of the business. But then maybe in 10 years, I want to own the seed part of the business. You can set those short-term and long-term ambitions. And don't be afraid here to dream big and make sure you really shoot for the stars.
And remember that those are going to fall in line with the goals of the business and the strategies of the business, so that they do go hand in hand.
They do, especially if you want both to be met and both to be successful. They should line up. Step 3 of your PDP is to gather information. So this will be, be a detective in this case. So what qualifications do you need to move up? How much would you like to make for retirement if you're in that stage of the business? So depending on where you are, age-wise and in the business, you can have all kinds of different things that you might need. You might say, at this point, I'm looking towards retirement, so I really just need to invest. So I'm going to maybe get a little bit more information about how I can invest and start handing over the business or looking at liquidating the business, whatever thing you need to do. And this is where people can really help you too for what qualifications you need. You can talk to the people above you in the business and say, what do I need to move up? What kind of things would you like to see leadership-wise and skill set-wise to get me to that next level? Step 4 of the PDP is to set your goals. And you can set long-term, short-term, but make sure that they're smart. Step 5, what skills and experience do you currently have? So take stock and see which skills are transferable, see where you're lacking in these skills, and try to really make sure you can try to get those skills in the short-term and long-term time frame. And that's step number 6. So what skills and experience do you need? Be honest with yourself, identify your gaps, and really see what you need and take that inventory from other people and, take their suggestions when they say that you do have a gap that you need filled. Step number 7 of developing your PDP is to identify possible resources. So see what further training you may need, and this can also encompass finding a mentor or a coach to kind of help guide you through this process. They might have some input. Look at, once again, conferences. Maybe your local community college or your local college has some classes you could take to help enhance your skill set. Number 8 in the PDP steps is to develop an action plan and a timeline. So like Maria talked about earlier, setting timelines, using your action plans. You need to make sure that your goals are smart and be detailed here. Step 9 is to execute your plan. So take steps every day to reach your goals that you've laid out. And step 10 is to assess your progress and revise it accordingly. So track your progress and keep a record at least monthly, we would say. So now that you've learned about the PDP, we're going to take a couple minutes to let you complete steps 1 and 2 of your PDP. So as a reminder, step 1 is where are you now? You need to assess your current career situation. And step 2, where do you want to go? And think big on this one. Great. So now that you've completed steps 1 and 2 of your PDP, we hope that you'll continue on and go steps 3 through 10 after this webinar.
Okay, so now let's get to the nitty-gritty and talk about succession planning goals. When it comes to succession planning, communication is key. I'll tell you that family businesses don't fail because of profit, growth, or revenue. They fail because of those non-financial goals and of lack of communication. That is the number one reason that makes family businesses not go from the second to the third generation. So you get second to third generation, there's only 13% of businesses that get to that third generation, because it's really hard to have communication when it's easier when it's founder to son or daughter or two sons. You go from founder owner to sibling partnership, which is still, relatively easy. You still need a lot of communication. But then when you get to that third generation, that cousin consortium, it really takes a really cohesive family and a really cohesive business that has boundaries and communicates to really be able to go forward and really have good succession plans in place. Of figuring out how people are going to enter and exit into the business is really important. So remember, communication is key. And I always say that really the sky's the limit on how you can configure the way that you're going to plan your succession process for your family. Remember, it is a process that you're going to have. So, of course, the first is identify the successors. If you're either going to pass it on within the family, sell it within the family, or sell it to an outsider, you're still identifying a possible successor. The only kind of exit option that you're not really identifying as a successor is when you're liquidating your business. So you do have to identify who your potential successors are, and think that it's going to take time to get through that process. If it's a intra-family succession, it usually takes almost 7 years to get that process to complete. Even when you're selling the business, it's still going to be 2 years. So think about that. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. So you really need to think about this process. Plan early, plan often. I always say, and I say this to my students in my class, and I say it in Extension out there and about, that if you want this to be a family business and you want to transfer the family business to your kids and your grandkids, you have to start when they're little. Part of having a family business is having that high identity and that love for the business, and that they fit into the business and they understand that business. So even if they never managed it, they would be competent owners. That's still part of that succession process. Remember, it's ownership transfer, not just management transfer. So you know, how do you want to make decisions with your adult children if they never made decisions with you when they were little? So how do you plan vacations? How do you just make general consensus within your family when they're little? And then how do you take that forward as they're growing and then become adults in their own right, and then have discussions with you? Because remember, you've got a lot of dynamics and a lot of hats and roles that people play in a family business. So where are those boundaries? So thinking that really comes into this plan often, plan early about how that's going to happen and how you're going to make that transfer go. Brainstorm, gather ideas. One size does not fit all. What works with one family may not work for your family. So you need to envision, and this is why this process is so important, envision what you want it to look like moving forward. Then you can think about asset transfer and tax implications. Then a lawyer and a tax accountant can help you configure it in the way that you envision. The time to think about the envisioning part or planning the goals is not when you're in your lawyer's office. It is before that, right? That technical step happens after you've really done this, the hard work of goals and objectives. So you want to make sure that you are setting specific goals and objectives that need to be met. Think about that timeline. And it may be that your succession timeline is T plus 30 years. That's perfectly okay. If you do have, so for example, I'll give you an example that I use in my class all the time. We use the roadmap, which we're going to talk about, and you're going to do in the coming session, is that you set a timeline, and T is when the succession process is going to start, whether it's ownership or management or both, and then you add the years T plus 1, T plus 6, 15, 30. And my students who are 21, 22, realize that their T0 is when they're 35, not 22. And that is a huge realization if you have your next generation coming on board, for them to have really specifics and that certainty that it's not going to be tomorrow. They're not going to come home back on the farm and suddenly own 30% of the farm. They might not be able to buy in until they're 30 or 27 or 35. And that last piece of ownership may not happen until somebody passes. And so, one of my students had T plus 15, and then he had T plus, we don't know, because he knew that part until, his grandparents passed away. That part of ownership would not fall to his parents, he would then have to wait on. So particularly in family farms where we have 3 generations, and farmers are on average 65 years old, you have, I have a lot of students with grandparents very much in the ownership and management. And so you want to make sure that those goals for the certainty of the next generation. The incumbent, you are certain, you own the farm. You know what's happening. But that next generation needs some certainty. Maybe they need to realize they need to work off the farm for 5 years and get some experience, get that professional development, bring something back into the family farm, because they're not really going to start that process for 10, 15 years, so they could work outside the farm and bring some experiences in. But that allows you to think about those things. Right, so that's why those are really important. And also, when you're thinking about this, there are milestones that have to happen as you're going through these succession planning goals. In terms of the first option that you might have set might be that you want to have a family succession process. But you might set milestones for both the incumbents and the successors, where the incumbent says, well, you have to work 3 years off farm, you have to bring these and these assets, you have to have some skin in the game, you have to be able to buy in 2 to 3 to 5, 10%, whatever that may be, to the business. So I know you're serious about coming back and that you're interested in this family farm, family business. And the successor might say, for me to come back, I know that you own the farm or family business and real estate assets and things like that. I have no interest in the real estate asset. You must divide and subdivide those 2 assets to be 2 different businesses. You have to professionalize your financing accounting system. And when I said this to a group that I talked to, the successor generation started laughing. So I'm thinking it's a pretty big problem. So think about those milestones that have to happen. If those are met, then maybe you go to the next option of exiting, is you might find a manager or somebody that you're going to sell outside. And maybe if that doesn't happen, maybe it's the 4th, 5th option. And the 5th option may be that you liquidate because there's no successor, family's not interested, all of those things. So that's why these deadlines is because you have milestones that you might need to set to be able to meet those goals and have and make that succession process a go.
Great. Well, we really appreciate everyone's time listening to this webinar. If you have questions, we're going to keep the line open for a little bit. So send your questions to reneewyatt@purdue.edu. We'd be happy to answer them live for you. Okay, so we have a question from Jenna. She said, you may have said this and I missed it, but when is the best time to discuss goals and objectives? At the monthly business meetings or at the kitchen table during a holiday? So first of all, definitely do not discuss these at a holiday. You want Christmas and Thanksgiving separate from these discussions on goals and objectives. It's not a great time to discuss things, and you don't want conflict at Christmas if you can avoid it.
No, remember those boundaries that we talked about of roles and objectives and the roles we play when we are at a holiday table of whichever holiday that may be. That's a family gathering. That's not a business gathering. So there has to be that boundary there. You should argue like every other American family over politics and religion, not over the business. So think about that.
Great. really appreciate you taking the time to learn more about, defining your goals and objectives. Since we've reached the end of our webinar, please take some time to complete our survey. You can see the link on the screen. We hope everyone has a great evening. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for joining us.